Madam President, we are glad to see you preside this meeting, and I would like to thank you for your important statement. I would also like to thank the distinguished briefers for their thorough and insightful remarks, and we take good note of the recommendations that have been presented. Madam President, the human and environmental toll of armed conflict is evident. Warfare destroys not only infrastructure and lives, it tears apart the natural systems that sustain societies. The impacts of widespread damage, millions of tons of rubble, explosive remnants of war, contaminated water, degraded soils, deforestation, scorched earth policies and their impacts, and ecosystem destruction linger long after the guns fall silent. Such harm erodes governance, fuels displacement, and deepens humanitarian crises, particularly in regions already under climate stress. We also recognize that beyond armed conflict, the impacts of climate change, particularly sea level rise, pose a serious existential risk to many countries, particularly the small island developing states. Of even greater concern is the deliberate weaponization of shared natural resources. And a textbook example is the unilateral suspension of the Indus Water Treaty by India earlier this year. For more than 6 decades, this treaty has stood as a model of cooperation, ensuring equitable and predictable sharing of the Indus Basin's waters between Pakistan and India, even in times of war. India's unlawful unilateral decision to suspend this framework undermines the letter and spirit of this treaty, threatens ecosystems, disrupts data sharing, and endangers the lives of millions who depend on the Indus River water system for food and energy security for their very survival. Such acts do not just harm one country. They weaken confidence in international water law and set a precedent for resource-based and driven coercion elsewhere. This should be of grave concern for every member of this Council and for the international community as a whole. Madam President, Pakistan has consistently maintained that no provision of the Indus Water Treaty permits unilateral suspension or modification. The Court of Arbitration's 2025 award reaffirmed the continuing validity of the treaty and its dispute settlement mechanisms, upholding Pakistan's position that all issues must be resolved within its legal framework. We therefore expect full respect for the treaty and an early return to compliance and normal functioning through the established channels. Madam President, in order to address the environmental impacts of armed conflict and climate-driven security risks, we must first focus on prevention and early resolution of conflicts. The Security Council must fulfill its charter responsibility to address threats to international peace and security at their very inception. Second, environmental considerations could be integrated into UN peace operations and political missions where relevant. Pakistan has done so in practice. In UNMISS, our engineering contingents have built 80 kilometers of life-saving dikes in Benchu, protecting hundreds of thousands from floodwaters. In MINUSCA, our peacekeepers have facilitated transhumance dialogues to prevent resource-based tensions. We welcome growing attention to making peacekeeping greener. These actions should be embedded in planning, budgeting, and mandate design. Third, uphold international law, especially international humanitarian law. This includes the obligations for parties to distinguish between civilian and military objectives, to take constant care to spare the civilian population, and to avoid methods of warfare expected to cause widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the natural environment. Fourth, promote UN system coherence. Greater coordination among UN country teams, DPO and DPPA, together with regional organizations and international financial institutions, is essential to align activities for environmental recovery and post-conflict stabilization, ensuring that financing, technical assistance, and field operations are mutually reinforcing. Fifth, provide climate and biodiversity finance that is new, additional, predictable, and grant-based. COP30 in Belém offers an opportunity to deliver on this, including by adequately capitalizing the Loss and Damage Fund, scaling up adaptation finance, and agreeing on a clear path toward implementing the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. However, we stress that such finance must not be debt-creating, nor should it be double-counted with development, humanitarian, or peace and security finance. Madam President, while recognizing that environmental damage in conflict is not just collateral damage, but can be a multiplier of insecurity, it is Pakistan's firm belief that comprehensive measures to address and combat the pernicious phenomenon of climate change can be best pursued through universal platforms under a cooperative approach based on the cardinal principle of common but differentiated responsibility and the legal obligations and commitments of parties. Pakistan stands ready to work with all partners at all relevant forums to uphold international law, advance environmental recovery in conflict-affected areas, and ensure that shared natural resources serve as avenues for cooperation and not contention. Thank you.